The soft click of calculator keys echoed in the small stillness of my home office. It wasn't much, a mismatched desk, an aging space heater humming in the corner, blinds half drawn to block the glare, but it was mine. A space carved out of necessity and long nights. The kind of quiet that felt earned. I had less than 30 minutes before I had to leave to pick up Elias from school, and I was determined to finish a client's year-end statement. Numbers were comforting. Clean, predictable, unlike the rest of my life. In the background, I could hear Elias humming to himself, probably doodling aliens again in his notebook. That sound always softened the hard edges of my day. He was my entire world, smart. Sweet, always noticing more than he let on. I'd gotten good at hiding the weight I carried, but kids like him, they always sense the heaviness. My fingers paused over the keys when the phone lit up with a familiar name. The kind of name that turned warmth to ice. Just seeing it made my jaw clench. A call like that never came without conditions. And just like that, my moment of calm cracked in half. A demand, not a request: show up for Alina's engagement dinner, bring my son, and pretend, once again, that everything was fine. That my mother wasn't silently tallying every moment I failed to meet her impossible standard. That Alina, perfect Alina, wasn't already the center of attention before I'd even stepped in the door. There was always a script to follow in my family. My sister played the lead. My mother directed. And I was the support staff. The quiet one. The reliable one. The one who didn't wear designer heels or post filtered selfies but somehow always ended up fixing other people's chaos. That phone call didn't come with warmth or interest, it came with expectation. It reminded me of my place in the family pecking order. And yet, like I always did, I would go. Not for them. For Elias. Because he still believed in showing up, in being kind, in doing the right thing even when no one clapped for you. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to believe in that too. Vivian's house had that polished perfection you see in magazines: marble floors, towering ceilings, fresh lilies carefully arranged like museum pieces, but it never felt warm. Not to me. The kind of place where you wipe your feet twice, speak softly, and pretend the air doesn't feel like ice. Elias and I stood at the front door for a second longer than necessary. I straightened his collar, smoothed my sweater, and took a breath I hoped would last through the evening. Inside, laughter floated from the living room, high-pitched and polished, unmistakably Alina's. It had always amazed me how a room full of people could sound so hollow. The warmth was decorative, not real. We were barely in the door before the scrutiny began. A glance at my shoes. A raised brow at Elias's shirt. The comments were never outright cruel, but they didn't have to be. They came laced in sugar and superiority. Meant to sting, but softly. Alina was perched on the edge of a cream sofa like she was posing for a bridal magazine. Hair flawless. Dress expensive. Confidence practiced. She greeted me like I was a distant coworker, not her sister. Her fiancé stood beside her, tall and clean-cut, like he'd walked off a Harvard brochure. There was something different about him, though. Something still. When our eyes met, I felt it, curiosity, not judgment. And when his gaze shifted to Elias, something changed. He didn't just glance. He saw him. Not like a checkbox or a problem to manage. He knelt slightly to match his eye level, smiled with genuine ease, and said something that made Elias grin. That rare kind of moment, the kind that catches you off guard, because you're so used to being overlooked, you forgot what being noticed feels like. I watched from a few steps away, trying to act like it didn't mean anything. Like my heart hadn't just twisted a little. Everyone else, as expected, ignored the exchange. My mother called for coats to be taken, shoes to be tucked away, and Alina slipped her hand through Julian's arm like a claim. But his eyes kept returning to Elias, and once, to me. Not with pity, but with something quieter. A question, maybe. Or a memory. Either way, it unsettled me in the gentlest way. For the first time in a long time, someone at that table made me feel like I wasn't invisible. Somehow, between the seating charts, the misplaced vendor contracts, and the calligrapher botching half the RSVPs, I became the silent engine behind my sister's wedding. No one officially asked me to take charge, it just happened. Like always. Alina was too busy getting eyelash extensions and trying on 10 nearly identical dresses to notice that the florist was missing key addresses. Vivian simply waved her hand anytime I mentioned a glitch, assuming I'd sorted out. And I did. Late into the evenings, with Elias sketching spaceships on the floor beside me and cold coffee growing bitter on my desk, I fixed everything, quietly, precisely, invisibly. It was during one of those nights, hunched over a misprinted guest list, that Julian stepped into the room. Sleeves rolled up, coffee in hand, eyes not condescending but curious. He didn't bark orders or ask why I was doing it all alone. He simply sat beside me, glanced over the color-coded notes I had scribbled in the margins, and listened. Really listened. It was a strange kind of silence, the kind that felt full instead of awkward. Somewhere between checking the spelling on escort cards and flagging last-minute changes, he asked if I'd ever known someone named Caroline. The name hit me like a soft knock in the chest. I remembered, clear as day, the hospital room, the girl with the shaved head and defiant eyes. Her laughter in the middle of so much pain. I remembered the stories I read to her, the way she'd tease me about the terrible hospital coffee, and the little boy who used to sit quietly in the corner sketching stars in old magazines. That boy had been Julian, and that girl, Caroline, had been his sister. The realization settled between us like a sudden hush. His expression changed. The distance in his eyes melted into something tender. He remembered me. He remembered Elias. And he remembered the kindness that filled that hospital room when so much else was falling apart. I hadn't thought about those days in years, not because I'd forgotten, but because they were stitched into me too deeply to name. From that moment on, something shifted. He didn't just look at me like a guest at his wedding. He looked at me like someone who had seen him once when no one else did, and now, maybe, he was seeing me too. It started with a phone call I didn't expect, Julian, his voice steady but thoughtful, asking me to meet him for coffee. I thought maybe it was about the seating chart, or another florist mix-up. But instead, he said the words that left me blinking in stunned silence. He wanted me to be the maid of honor. Not a bridesmaid. Not a plus one. The maid of honor. I didn't know what to say. My name wasn't even on the wedding website. I wasn't listed in the program drafts. I'd been treated more like staff than family. And now, this, I didn't say yes right away. I didn't trust moments that felt too good to be real. Especially not when they came wrapped in the same packaging as everything else I'd been burned by. But Julian didn't flinch when I hesitated. He said it plainly, he wanted someone beside him on that day who had actually shown up when it mattered. Not just for a party or a photo op, but for the hard stuff. The real stuff, so I said yes. Quietly. Cautiously. And almost immediately, the backlash followed like clockwork. Vivian called before I'd even had a chance to breathe. Her voice was all ice and venom, no warmth. She didn't ask why, or how. She went straight into attack mode, accusing me of making the wedding about myself, of manipulating Julian, of trying to steal attention from Alina. As if I'd clawed my way into the spotlight instead of being pulled gently, sincerely, into a role that, for once, recognized my worth. I didn't yell back. I'd stopped trying to explain myself to people who never really listened. I just let her speak. Let the storm pass over me like it always did. The words she hurled were nothing new, selfish, dramatic, a burden in sensible shoes. And underneath it all, the truth throbbed like a bruise. She wasn't angry I was maid of honor. She was angry that someone finally saw me. Saw the years I carried silently, the weight I bore without applause. And maybe, just maybe, she was angry that I didn't need her permission anymore to exist in the room. The church was grand, the kind of place meant for royalty or fairy tales, vaulted ceilings, white roses draped in silken bows, chandeliers glittering like frozen stars. Every detail had been curated to perfection, down to the pearls on Alina's veil and the imported ribbon on each pew. But beneath all that shimmer, the air felt stiff and brittle, like something about to crack. I stood in my modest blue dress, simple, soft, intentionally quiet, holding Alina's bouquet and moving through each choreographed moment like a shadow. I wasn't there to shine. I wasn't supposed to be seen. But somehow, just existing in that space was enough to rattle them. Vivian gave me her usual once-over. The kind that scanned for flaws before a word ever passed her lips. Alina didn't speak to me in the bridal suite. Not a nod, not a glance. Just a string of bridesmaids flitting around her like butterflies while I stood in the corner, steady and still. I didn't expect gratitude. I never did. I showed up for Elias, who sat in the front row in his little suit, swinging his feet and smiling at me like I was the one getting married. The ceremony itself passed in a haze of organ music and flashbulbs. It was during the reception that everything unraveled. Alina took the microphone in her glittering white gown, her voice sugar-sweet and venom-laced. She thanked her guests, praised Julian, then turned to me, her dear sister, the quiet one, the brave single mom. The room chuckled as she paused, smiling with theatrical sympathy, and remarked on how courageous it must be to go through life without ever being truly loved. The silence after that wasn't silent at all, it was filled with polite laughter, sideways glances, wine glasses clinking too loudly. I sat frozen, Elias's small hand reaching for mine under the table. Before I could even process the sting, Vivian chimed in from across the room, adding her polished cruelty, how I'd always been the plain one, but second-hand goods still have value, especially with a built-in child. That time, the laughter was louder. My chest burned, but I didn't flinch. Not for them. I stayed still for Elias. Because even in a room full of glitter, I knew my worth didn't need a spotlight to be real. I was still gripping Elias's small hand when the scrape of a chair startled the room into silence. Julian stood. His expression, so often calm and unreadable, was now flushed with something else. Not anger exactly, but something deeper. Disappointment, maybe. Or truth rising to the surface. His hands were clenched at his sides, shoulders squared. He walked slowly to the center of the room, took the microphone gently from Alina's hand, and for a moment, no one breathed. He didn't look at her. He looked at the guests, some shifting in their seats, others still chuckling, unsure if this was part of the show. But it wasn't. Julian's voice cut through the quiet like a slow-moving tide. Steady. Unapologetic. He said that tonight was supposed to be the most important day of his life, but it wasn't the ceremony or the champagne or the dress that made it so. It was the moment he realized he'd been clinging to the wrong idea of love. He turned to me then, eyes steady, voice full. And he told them all how we had met years ago, in the fluorescent hum of a hospital room. How I'd read to Caroline during her worst days, how I brought stories and songs and a little boy with sketches of galaxies and sunshine that made his dying sister laugh. He spoke of kindness, not grand gestures, but the quiet kind that stays when no one's watching. The kind that changes people. He said my name like it was sacred. And then, without faltering, he called off the wedding. Gasps scattered through the crowd. One woman dropped her glass. Alina reached for him, her voice shaky, a whisper of panic under her perfectly polished facade. Vivian rose, pale and rigid, trying to regain control. But Julian wasn't listening. He turned to her, his voice still calm, and said he'd pay for every plate, every flower, every unnecessary flourish. And then he walked, not away, toward us, toward me. He knelt in front of Elias first, thanking him for being the sunshine that Caroline had clung to. Elias, wide-eyed but steady, nodded like he understood. And then Julian stood and extended his hand, not as a rescue, but as an invitation. I took it. Not because I needed saving, but because for the first time, someone saw me as I was and chose me anyway. We walked out together, past the stunned guests, past Alina frozen in her glittering gown, past Vivian's fury burning under her silent glare. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Some endings don't deserve a second glance. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, like a deep breath after drowning. Elias clutched my other hand, and Julian walked beside us, not ahead, not behind, just beside. And as the doors shut behind us, all that cruelty and noise stayed sealed inside. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally let go of everything that never saw me. We didn't say much as we drove. The silence wasn't awkward, it was necessary. A kind of hush that follows the collapse of something long overdue. We ended up at a small seaside restaurant tucked into the edge of the coast, away from the glitter, away from the damage. The kind of place with wooden tables, dim lighting, and a view of the water that didn't try to impress you. It just existed, steady, quiet, real. We sat outside on the terrace, the ocean just a few feet away, waves brushing the shore like deep breaths in the dark. Elias sat between us, tracing the grain of the table with one finger, calm in a way only he could be after so much noise. His presence had always been like that, a lighthouse in the fog. Unshaken. Steady. Our food came, but none of us touched it for a long time. Julian finally broke the stillness. He apologized, not just for the wedding, but for everything. For the cruelty I'd endured, the way I'd been treated like furniture by the people who were supposed to love me. He explained why he'd ever been with Alina in the first place, how after Caroline died, he'd felt empty, drifting. Alina, with her shine and her charm, had been a distraction from the grief. But over time, the brightness began to feel artificial, like light with no warmth. I didn't blame him. We all reached for something when we were broken. I just nodded, letting his words sit in the air. No judgment. Just truth. Across the table, Elias had started sketching quietly in his notebook. A lighthouse this time, perched on a cliff with stars swirling above it. Julian noticed and smiled, his voice low when he said that Caroline had kept Elias's old drawings by her bedside. That they had made her laugh on days when nothing else could. Elias blinked, like he was realizing it for the first time, that something he did mattered that much to someone he barely knew. He sat up straighter. Said nothing, but smiled in that small, knowing way of his, in that quiet place, beneath the darkening sky. It felt like the storm had finally passed. Not everything was healed. Not everything was whole. But for the first time in a long time, we weren't surviving, we were breathing. Together. The next morning, we drove out to the cemetery. The sun hung low behind soft clouds, casting a golden haze across the winding road. Autumn leaves whispered across the path as we walked, crisp underfoot, rust-colored and brittle. It was quiet in that way sacred places tend to be. Not silent, but reverent. Caroline's headstone sat beneath a tree with curling bark and branches that arched gently overhead, like arms offering shade. The stone itself was simple. No grand marble or elaborate carvings, just her name, the dates, and a line that read, "Light in dark places." I swallowed hard at that. Julian knelt first, setting down a bouquet of fresh white lilies. His hand hovered over the stone like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Grief never leaves you, it just softens at the edges, reshapes itself into memories you can almost bear to hold. I stood a few steps behind, Elias's small hand in mine, the two of us watching him in quiet respect. Then Elias stepped forward. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a smooth stone he'd painted the night before. A yellow sun in the center, a trail of tiny stars dancing around the edges. For her, he whispered, though it was more breath than sound. He placed it gently beside the flowers, then rested his fingers on it like he was sealing a promise. My chest tightened. Julian's breath hitched, and I saw his shoulders tremble. I reached out without thinking, resting my hand lightly on his arm. He didn't pull away. He just nodded, eyes shining, as if the words were too heavy to say out loud. We stood there a while, the three of us, not speaking. We didn't need to. The breeze stirred the trees, and I closed my eyes for a moment, whispering a thank you I hoped Caroline could somehow hear. Thank you for seeing me. For remembering Elias. For leaving behind a brother who knew how to show up with both hands open. As we walked back to the car, Julian reached for my hand again. And this time I didn't hesitate. It didn't fix everything. But it felt like the beginning of something true. Something honest. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking alone. A year later, the leaves had turned again, crimson, gold, and rust drifting through the wind like confetti from a life I no longer recognized. Outside my modest brick office, I hung a new sign with careful hands, Monroe Financial Services. My name. My firm. My future. The space wasn't flashy, white walls, worn wood floors, and the faint smell of fresh paint still lingering in the corners. But it was mine. Inside, a soft gray couch hugged one wall, next to shelves lined with ledgers, plants I remembered to water, and a corkboard filled with Elias's drawings, spaceships, stars, and recently, a proud little sketch of me with a cape and calculator. It made clients smile when they saw it. Business had started slow, but word got around. People liked that I listened, that I cared about the details, that I showed up. Quietly, consistently. Just like always, Elias, now 11, had grown taller and more confident. His voice carried more strength now, but his heart remained the same, gentle, curious, kind. He'd just been named captain of the soccer team, something he still pretended didn't matter even as he beamed every time someone mentioned it. Watching him walk into the world with steady feet was the greatest success I could ever claim. Every bruise I'd taken along the way, every silent hurt, I'd carry them all again if it meant getting him here. And then there was Michael. That's what people called him now, Michael, not Julian. Maybe a fresh start needed a new name. Maybe it was just easier. But to me, he was the same man who had once knelt beside my son and offered him dignity in a room full of laughter meant to hurt. He still worked long hours, but never missed dinner. Never missed a game. Never missed me. He wasn't loud about his love. He didn't need to be. It was in the small things, the way he always made 2 mugs of coffee without asking, or slipped notes into Elias's backpack before tests. We weren't married, not yet. But in every way that mattered, we were a family. Some days I still woke up surprised by the peace. It didn't roar. It didn't announce itself. It just settled in, quiet and steady, like sunlight through an open window. A life rebuilt, not from noise, but from love. Real, ordinary, extraordinary love. It was Christmas Eve, and our little living room glowed with the warmth that doesn't come from fireplaces or lights, but from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Elias had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked around him, his breathing soft and steady. A half-empty mug of cocoa rested near his hand, forgotten in the excitement of the day. The tree sparkled quietly in the corner, and the only sound was the faint rustle of wind brushing the windows. Michael and I sat side by side on the floor, backs against the couch, sharing a silence that felt like a shared breath. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. I turned to him slowly. Not expecting it, not needing anything. Inside the box was an emerald ring, delicate, vintage, glowing with a soft kind of light. Caroline's ring. The one she'd once told him to give to someone who reminded him what love looked like. My eyes welled before I even heard the words. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. Just asked if I'd marry him, if we could make official what had already been true for a long time. I said yes, not because I was swept off my feet, but because I had never felt more grounded. More seen. More certain that this love, quiet, earned, and unconditional, was what I had waited for all along. I looked over at Elias, curled up and safe, and I felt something settle inside me. Peace. The kind that doesn't shout or sparkle but stays. Outside the window, snow had started to fall, soft, steady, silent. A fresh layer. A new beginning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was home. I've learned that strength isn't loud, it's in the quiet choices, the silent endurance, the way you keep going even when no one claps. I learned that love doesn't always come in the form we expect, but when it's real, it sees you, all of you. My advice? Don't let anyone make you feel small for being steady. Don't wait for permission to be proud of your journey. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you found your peace after the storm? I'd love to hear your story. Thank you so much for listening to mine. Until next time.